Okay, we're on page 165 in the Maamar Ohr lArba, and the Rebbe is explaining a beautiful idea over here about the way, the process in which seichel comes from the mind to the heart, and it goes through what we call the Meitzer Hagorim, the straits of the neck. And he explained this, he began explaining it, and today we'll learn more about it, that it takes a goren, a spiritual position of limitation and restriction to make the flow from the seichel to the midos be proper. And if you don't have that, you have a messed up situation, either too much or too little. So let's now go to page 165 and let's learn inside what the Rebbe says. And this is it's about 7 lines from the top. Actually, it's the last word, kemoi, on the 7th line, I believe, from the top. Kemoi. Kemoi shonuroyim, as we see, bechush. The word chush means in a very actual and tangible way. In other words, it's not here philosophical, but very practical. What do we see? Ba'avodah shebalev, regarding the service of the heart. When a person reflects, meditates, contemplates on a godly concept, and he understands it very well, the result of this is that there is an arousal, an awakening, and a movement of the heart in the sense of a hispailut. In other words, the heart is moved emotionally. When you understand something very well, it's not just appear. It starts making your heart feel and either gravitate towards it or distance yourself from it. Harei ein nimshich mamish min hamoach el halev. Says the Rebbe, it doesn't come directly from the moach to the left, from the mind to the heart. Kiyim, rather, Hillel 165, 10 lines in. Kiyim shebe'emtza yesh his almut. There, in the middle, there is a concealment. His almut from the word helen. Ki'ilu, as though lo yesh shum davar. There's nothing there. In other words, there is a moment, a minute, there is a time in which the idea, as it found itself in the mind, is lost. V'hainu, and he explains, let's see how he says it. The hainu, the oz, eino, at that moment, it isn't loy b'bchinas hasoga. You cannot say that it is comprehensible. Neither is it v'loy b'bchinas hispailos amidas. Neither is it emotionally felt in the emotions. V'yisalmuzos, and this concealment, it, specifically it, hamevia min hamoach halalev, that is the point of transition from the mind to the heart. Hillel, what is this in psychological terms?
I gotta get into it. I'm just trying to catch up.
Okay.
I'll do better.
Okay, so what he's saying, let's talk about this for a moment, Yonasim. What he's saying is that the idea, as you know it in your mind, right? You understand it, you're thinking about it, it's very much there, it's very much alive. When the idea comes into the heart and you start feeling it, it's very much alive. Says the Rebbe, there's a point, and what was our original question yesterday? How is it that something that's intellectual becomes emotional? The transition is, that was our question, Issa, right? That's the question. Something that is seichel, all of a sudden now it's midas. How does that happen? That's what we're struggling. We're looking to answer in this section that we're learning now. So the Rebbe says here, it takes the straits of the goron. In Hebrew, we call this Meitzar HaGoroin. Just like in the physical body, there's the head, and there's the body, and there's the neck. The neck is considered narrow. It's narrow compared to the wide head and the wide body and all that. So what's that mean on a spiritual level or on a psychological level? It means that there's a point in which the seichel, with its potency and purity, needs to, for a moment, be lost, be forgotten. And at that moment, it gives room for a transition for feelings. And I think that this is, we'll see I think that this is very different than the way psychology looks at this issue. But let's...
How so?
Oh, well, I mean, here, again, if I understand it correctly, he's saying that you know what? Let me read another 2, 3, 4 lines and then go back to the how so question, okay? The pikashem shebeseichel, just as in the mind itself, har yesh inyan hishtoimus, there's a concept called hishtoimamut. How do you guys translate the word hishtoimamut?
From the last time we did this Maamar, I have it. He's talking about astonishment.
Astonishment. Okay. The kasher ha'adam yodeya eze haskola. When a person has a concept and knows the concept, umeyageyes atzmai, and the person exerts diligence, lahamik atzmai beho'iyun, to delve deeply into the idea, to work to intellectually to understand it, and exerts mental energy. After the exertion and the depth, he's entirely astonished. Meaning, but in the sense that the hainu, let's go what? Shelo yeshum or seichel klal. At the point of astonishment, there is no light of seichel, meaning there is no illumination of seichel. Because initially he thought and delved deeply into the idea that he delved into. At that time he had enlightenment, right? The idea was shining into him and illuminating him and inspiring him intellectually. But the next stage, uvishtoimamus, lo yeshum gilui seichel klal. At that time, there is no gilui or vos dafke. But then, specifically, hu shenoifolo yaskola hakadosha. That's when the new idea enters the mind, and he has something deeper and better. So what he's saying is that through the process of ishtoimamush, which means the moment where you kind of aren't illuminated with seichel, but rather allow your seichel to be submerged into something higher and unknown, it's then that it gives birth to a new idea. And this is all within the mind. The Rebbe is saying so too, in a moment he's going to tell us, so too is in the transition from the mind to the heart. That only when the mind is illuminated and then takes a back seat can there be a feeling that's developed? Because if the mind, listen to his argument, if the mind is present, then you can't have a feeling. If seichel is active, it demands intellect. It demands seichel. It's not a time. It's against feeling. Pure seichel is against feeling. Yeah, that's why you have some people who are really, really intellectuals. They're like stones when it comes to emotions. Why? Because they are seichel. Seichel is what drives them and who they are. And if there's no seichel there, it means nothing to them. You could jump, you could cry, you could laugh, it can be outrageous, but if they don't understand it, it doesn't talk to them. And the same is true the other way around. If someone is totally emotional and has no relationship with seichel, all that person relates to is emotions. When it comes to something that's sichli, it doesn't talk to him either. Here, what are we saying? We're saying that the right transition is, the proper transition, the healthy transition is when seichel does communicate with midos, but how is that possible? Seichel is the opposite of midos. The answer is there's a point within seichel where seichel takes a back seat, and what we're left with is hishtomemush, and hishtomemus, astonishment, is the point in which the feeling is the nekuda, the germ of the feeling is formed in the brain, and only then can a feeling be formed in the heart. If you don't form a feeling in the brain, an intellectual feel, if seichel in the brain doesn't give any place to the idea of an emotion, emotions can't be formed. So the Rebbe says here that therefore there is a place in the brain where seichel gives room for the existence, the future existence of a midah, of an emotion. And where is that? In the mode called hishtomemus. Why? Because astonishment, it's astonishment of the brain, but what does it consist of? You're astonished. That's a midah. It's not a midah of the heart, it's a midah of the brain. The notion of astonishment, hishtomemus, is an emotional notion. And the brain, after it understands something, it kind of sits back in its own place, and it now allows itself to be submerged in the unknown. You have to try this to experience it. And it could be done. This is part of Chabad meditation. The system of Chabad meditation is what we're talking about here, where you learn something very well. For that, you don't need to be a Chabadnik for that. To learn, you need to, simple learning means to learn well. Then to think, meditate, reflect on that very strongly, without disruptions, under your talis, close your eyes, go into a room, whatever it takes, not to be disturbed by anything and anyone. Okay, so the environment and venue is very helpful and very important. Again, some very big intellectuals can do it in front of everyone because they can go like this and just phase out. They're not there. But most people can't. When the phone rings and the kids nag you and and your cell phone is in front of you and your rabbi's giving a drasha, you can't meditate. You can't reflect. Yes, Jonas.
Ja, der kon weer mensen wearing hearing aid, I can turn them off.
You see, yesterday you talking about disability. There's a mila coming from your disability.
That's what I do. I turn my hearing aids off and I meditate before I daven.
Very good.
Turn them back on.
Okay, but those of us who don't yet have hearing aids, and we should never have hearing aids, you need to find a way of making the Hisbonenus experience possible. But that's not what we're talking about yet. So that's just a technicality. And I say just. It's a very important technicality because much of the time, the disruptions impact the clarity of the Hisbonenus. And that's why we're not successful. People ask, I meditated and I'm still not moved. The truth is you didn't meditate. Why? Because you thought you meditated. Thinking about an idea is not meditation. That's not meditation. Not for sure not Chabad meditation and even other meditation. If you look into Aryeh Kaplan's books on Judaism meditation and other things, it's a different type. See, it's not just thinking. Machshava. Machshava is common to learning Torah. Everyone has to have machshava. Talking about his bonus. So, okay. So say you are under your talis, or you turn your hearing aid off, or you're by yourself in the room with no telephone, no phones, and you tell your wife, please, don't nudge me unless it's an emergency. Emergency. Not urgent. Emergency. You know how when you go to a hotel, they have that sign on the door, do not disturb? You put the do not disturb on outside for your wife and kids. Anyway, so then you start thinking about the idea and you're really focusing on the idea. Fine. Then there's a place where you just sit back. Your mind strips itself from understanding the idea, being proactive, and letting the idea absorb you. That process of the idea absorbing you, I believe, is what we call here hishtoimemus. So I don't know if the English word is the right word, astonishment, even though we used it in the past. But in other words, it's like an overwhelming sensation, intellectual sensation that and I'm telling you, I've had it a few times in my life, not often, but where all of a sudden something kind of pops into your head and you have no idea, where did it come from? I wasn't thinking about it. I'll give you an example. I was once reflecting, being misbeinen on chapter 41 in Tanya, and I think I've told you that since I was a bocher in Maristan, the yeshiva at Melech Tzviva, our mashpia, and even before that, encouraged us to memorize the first 12 lines. And Baruch Hashem, I've done it, for most of my life. Okay, right. So, but it gets routine. The same words, the same ideas, over and over and over and over and over. And I remember once, I forget, it was probably the last 10, 15 years, I had somehow was able to be merakiz. There's a Hebrew word, rikuz hamachshava, focus of the mind. Merakiz, with the mem, right, mafil in Hebrew grammar, mafil, merakiz. I was able to be merakiz my machshava. I was able to make my thought focus, rikuz, very narrow on the idea, and all of a sudden, as I'm thinking the words of chapter 41 that I've done thousands of times, right? I could say it in my sleep, right? And all of a sudden, an idea came to me that I'd never thought of all of these thousands of times, and it was a very, very insightful idea. Within the context, not other ideas, in what I was thinking about and meditating on and reflecting on, a new Ohr. That's what he says here. Haskalah chadasha. A new idea entered my mind. Where did it come from? It didn't come yesterday. It didn't come last year. Why did it come now when I became smarter all of a sudden? I'm not learning now as much as I learned in yeshiva, so we can't say that's the answer. And it didn't come from the things I'm doing now, which are good things, but still, the answer is seemingly that when you succeed in getting to the Hishtoimemus point, then Haskalah Chadasha can come in. In other words, we're talking about a Haskalah Chadasha, a new idea, not a new feeling, a new idea. This is what the Rebbe says here. Now, this is all in the mind. Let's continue just a second. He says now, Hinikein hu, so too, shebehisalmus shebemeitzer habmara agaron. When there is the concealment caused by the straits of the neck, that's when you can have the transition from the mind to the heart. Says the Rebbe, now he goes the other way. He plays like devil's advocate. Since you're telling me that the only time that the transition is successful is when there is this concealment of intellect in the position of Meitzer Agorin, then there can come about the three ministers of Parai, Kona Veshet Vriden, the esophagus, windpipe, food pipe, and the vein Shebetzavar. Oh, hey. We got three things up here, and if they don't go down the right tubes, we choke, God forbid. In other words, there's a virtue of the Hisalmut position, but there's a risk also, Hillel. And the risk is that what can creep in is something very unhealthy. Let's see how he says it. Veheim his gabrut hachomriut shibinyone moilam hazeh. It's at that time that you can become very corporeal with material matter. Ba'achilo shtio sichos adamim, food, drinking, and anger. The boiling of the blood. Risichat hadamim. Sheheim amoinim u'ma'akvim. They prevent sheyimshich min hamoyach halev, that the transition shouldn't be fine. So this is very interesting, and there's not a lot of elaboration here, but this is something that we need people like Hillel and others who have the background to elaborate and explain in psychological terms what this means. That on one hand, the place where the transition is successful is when you let go of the intellect and you allow the intellect to overwhelm you, meaning that time you could form an emotion or the beginning of an emotion, and at the very same time be cognizant that in other words, when there's no light, what does it say? What does it say by Yosef? The pit was empty, there was no water. Says Rashi, there were snakes and scorpions. What does that mean? Not that you brought new snakes and scorpions into the pit. By the fact that there was no water, automatically there were scorpions. The fact that you're now in a position of Isalmut, of the mind being on hold, on pause, automatically it's room for issues that can really hurt you in a bad way, i.e. overeating, overdrinking, and anger. Hillel, what do you want to say? Nothing? Okay.
Yeah,
I thought you wanted to say something. Okay. And let's see how he develops it. The Gam although he meditates and understands very well the idea, Avraham, the result is it doesn't come into the heart, and he's not emotionally touched. He can be the biggest, he can know the Daf HaYomi and Ochsidis and everything. And when it comes to a feeling of the heart, he's like a stone. Moshe, look what the Rebbe says now. V'zeh shoneroyim shebenekel harbi yoyser his bonus de moyach v'soyres his pilos alev. It's much easier for most people to meditate and reflect intellectually than to feel emotionally. And I don't know if Isser you're on, but this touches what Isser said yesterday. This is exactly what Isser was saying, I think, what he was saying yesterday. You can understand someone's pain, but you don't feel it. That's what the Rebbe just said now. You hear that? You can understand. But Issa was saying, Hillel weren't here, Issa was saying yesterday, but he doesn't feel the pain. That's what the Rebbe says here. Why? Because understanding, I understand you. I really do. Can you say, I feel you? I feel it? No, you don't feel it. Because if you feel it, you wouldn't be able to sleep at night. If you feel it, you would do something. If it's you, God forbid, if we have a headache, a footache, a handache, and not worse, chas v'shalom. I know myself, when I have a cold, I'm ois mensch, we say in Yiddish, ois mensch. I'm not a human. I can't function normally, just from a little cold. A little, right? No, ask ourselves the question. Are we ois mensch when we hear, Yonis said, Nebuch, there was this terrible shooting in Bnei Brak yesterday. In other words, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about where it's like I can't sleep, I can't eat, I can't think. I'm all tzuchusht, another Hebrew Yiddish word. I'm all disturbed. I'm just disturbed. I can't think clear. And this the Rebbe says, so why? It's easier to meditate, to reflect, to understand than it is to feel. And that's the answer for a large part of Avodas Hashem is that feeling Hashem, feeling God, really feeling the Ava and the Yira, it's a big Avodah. That's the whole Tanya. Hillel. The Alter Rebbe's Tanya is to develop a feeling of Avas Hashem and Yiras Hashem. And it's not a book of Musar. Musar tells you, be clean and come on time, and fine. Chassidus and the Alter Rebbe's Chassidus is about the Av and the Yira. Are you inspired with loving God and fearing God, and really in your bones? You don't need someone to tell you, don't do this. You yourselves are so vilified by what's wrong that it's disgusting, right? You don't need a rabbi to tell you. You don't need your wife to tell you. You don't need the community to tell you. You know this is evil. This is wrong. This is not what Hashem says. And that's an avodah. It's a big avodah. It takes a lot of work. And it takes a lifetime. And like we said yesterday, as long as you're on that path, it's fine. Let's continue. And although, you know what, we're going to stop here because we'll finish this paragraph, and next week, the last week of learning will be next week in Mitzvah Shem, right? So we will finish the Maamar Ohr. Any questions? Hillel, you missed a very heavy discussion yesterday about suicide, and we really needed your input. So when and if you, I don't hear you, Hillel, you're on mute.
I wanted to say that I listened to the YouTube shir last night, so that conversation stayed with me. Moshe and I continued it this morning in the mikveh.
Well,
so yeah. It was a great shir.
And if at any point you have something to add, I'm sure we would all appreciate it because it's.
Well, I just in my career, I've had several. I've had to live through several suicides, and one in particular to go to the point of you can't always tell that people emphasized that I was once running a supervision group for therapists. So these are, seasoned mental health professionals. And one lady in the group says, well, I'm not going to be here next month. I'm going to Paris. So everybody says, ooh, la la, you're going to Paris. And, and she bantered back and forth and it was a suicide trip. That was her plan. It was that elaborately staged that she could sort of really cover for it, and none of us got it. I went with a fine-tooth comb over every interaction I'd had with this lady for years afterwards because it was just astonishing to me that could be so deeply developed, and none of us, and I didn't get it, and so I think it's just a very powerful thing to meditate on, that anybody we're in front of has some hidden pain that we're not likely to see.
Yeah.
Often can't see.
Yeah. Moshe, I can see that you're. Yeah, go ahead, Isser. Yeah.
If I could tell you a story very quickly.
Yeah.
That's, I think, very directly related to today's lesson. And I was told this story by, I think it was Tzvi Flumenbaum. Moshe knows Moshe, the father. But in Boston, the minhag was the Rebbe would take a bacher, 17, 18 years old, and he would be a hoizbacher for the Rebbe. And after a year, after he was close to the Rebbe, learned the minhagim and really got to see the Rebbe's avot up close, he would go off and go into shidduchim. So the first day on the job as hoizbacher, I believe it was Tzvi, maybe Nasano Flumenbaum. At the time the Rebbe was sick, they essentially set up like a hospital room in the house. They had private minyanim in the house. He had a hospital bed and a shower and a commode there. But he was told, okay, don't put any phone calls through until later on when we tell you. And somebody kept calling and calling and calling. And he kept telling the person, please call back later, please call back later. Finally, the Rebbe told him, put him through. So he put the speakerphone on, and this fellow told the Rebbe his tsaros, what was going on. And the Rebbe gave him eitzes, what to do. He was very positive. He was the Eibusher will help him. Everything will be okay. It'll be fine. And the Rebbe hung up the phone, and then he just burst out crying. Now, Tzvi, the first day on the job, 18-year-old bacher, in front of his Rebbe, and his Rebbe is sobbing his eyes out, and he doesn't know what to do. He said, I was so uncomfortable, like, what do I say? So I asked the Rebbe, how long has the Rebbe known this person who called? The Rebbe says, I never met him in my life. I have no idea who he is. And he said, that's when I realized why he was a Rebbe. Because he could feel that. But the first was the intellectual, this is the eitzah, this is what you should do, it's all going to be okay. And then afterwards, he let the pain come through.
I hear it. Good. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Moshe, I see that you're still in pain from this. I could see it on your face. So I feel your pain. That's what it seems to me, that you're still very disturbed, and I can understand. I can understand. I don't feel it, because Nebuch, we had here in Borough Park a girl jump off the 13th to 47th right here, the hotel. 3-4 years ago, took her life. It's mental illness. It's gefährlich. We need to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu to lessen mental illness. And I'm telling you, I'm telling you. I mean, we all know this. It's crept into our. What do I mean? It's all min hashamayim, but it's just now part of the fabric. I'm dealing with shidduchim. It's like I can't get a normal someone without baggage. I don't care. It's about Shuva FFB, but just everyone has some baggage. But but you have to start worrying about mental health. That's very scary. It's very scary, and. You need Rachmi Hashem. You push it, need Rachmi Hashem. When you marry off your kids, your grandkids, that people be healthy mentally, just basic health. Not talking about anything more. Basic health. You know, the religiosity and everything else will fall into place. A little better, a little worse. You know, and that's something that it's really a trying time for us, for the world, and for us in particular in this area. And that's why Mashiach, who is around the corner, needs to come to also help us this way. There is the Mashiach for the enlightenment, for the Or, for the Gilui, for the Gewaldige Chidushei Torah and the Messianic area, as the Rambam says. And then there's Mashiach to solve the pain and problems that the world has currently. You know, it's you know, we're all a little older. You know, you look back, like, did you see this in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s? You know, every one of us has coming from a different background. You know, I don't know.
I think it was there, but it wasn't as open. It wasn't spoken about.
I
It wasn't discussed.
I understand. I know that. But somehow that not openness, again, maybe we were oblivious, you know, or we hid it under the rug. But I'm saying, I don't know, things were working, were going. So our counter argument is, yeah, but now we see the results of that, hiding the facts and not dealing with it. You know, it's complicated. You know, it's you have to also, you know, the Torah. You have to look from the Torah's perspective. Torah talks about homosexuality. That's in the Torah. So. That's thousands of years. That's divine. Now, so what is Hashem saying? Is he just talking to in other words, it seems like the Eibush is acknowledging that this issue will be part of your community. And therefore, I'm saying, Hashem am saying is that so and so. But by the fact that he's saying that don't do this and don't do that, and this is prohibited, means that we're going to confront it. I don't know. Do you guys? Yes, Moshe.
You know, I got a lot of comfort. Nechama, I listened finally yesterday at some point. I listened to the interview, Rabbi Balvin, that you did with Rabbi Label Wolf.
Oh, yes.
And I just hadn't had a chance to listen to it. I'm a big fan of Rabbi Label Wolf. I've been intrigued by his style, his way. If anybody didn't listen to it, you should listen to it. It's an excellent interview. But he said something I thought was so profound, which touches, I think, on every single aspect of what we've been speaking about on our lives and across generations. He said, society has been very good about making classes that teach people how to speak, right? How to speak to an audience, how to give over ideas. He said, but society does not give and should give classes on how to listen. And I heard that and I was like, that's such an essential component about just being a Jew, being a human being.
Being a makabel, being a makabel.
But when you listen to that art, I mean, we all know the art of being a good listener.
Right. Yeah.
It's such a fundamental component, and as time, I feel the time, we spoke about, you just asked what was different. I mean, let's say I grew up, let's say, in the 70s, the 80s, right? But the aspect of listening, I think, is something which, unfortunately, in many elements of society, levels of society, has been something which is often much. it's like gone to the side
Yeah.
in many respects.
Uh,
It's such a fundamental
right.
element
Right.
of existence.
The interview that's going on tonight is also with someone from Australia, and there's a story there with the Amshina Rebbe, he and I, about listening, and I encourage you when you have time to see it. Also, it should be a phenomenal. Hear his where he's coming from, and it's on the line. The Amshina Rebbe told, we went to see him, and we both were blown away just from how he conducted himself. And then he said to the Amshina Rebbe, as we're standing face to face, about to go down the steps at 6:45 in the morning in Bayit Vagan. I'll never forget that day. And he called himself a taxi for us, and he walked us down the steps. But before that, my friend said to him, "Thank you, Rebbe, for teaching me the virtue or the art of listening." And he cried. So what you're saying, it's an art, and it's a lost art. It's a lost art, but it's good to talk about it and to bring it back. Chevra, we'll see everyone tomorrow. Have a great day. Zeit gesund. Bye bye. Shalom. Bye.